Hello, and welcome to episode 71 of Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. This is one half of your co-host, Sean, and I'm bringing you the second part of our interview with Colin McComb. In the first part, we talked about his introduction to all things fantasy, his time with TSR and Wizards of the Coast, and his writing of one of the companion guides, The Complete Book of Elves. And now we are transitioning to his time working on video games, everything from Torment Tides of Numenera to what he's currently doing with 3 Pound Games in the realm of VAR. So we hope you enjoy this second part of our interview with Colin McComb. Thank you and enjoy. We've talked a little about Planescape, and now we kind of want to transition to the Planescape video games. So if you could tell us how Torment came into being, and then we're really interested in, especially with Critical Role and the Legend of Vox Machina with their crowdsourcing, if you could talk about Tides of Numenera and how that crowdsourcing Kickstarter, because for people who don't know, Tides of Numenera was the #1 video game at the time for crowdsourcing, so at least through Kickstarter. So if you could just tell us how both of those came about.
The biggest fundraising thing on Kickstarter for like a hot week, and then the Veronica Mars sequel came along, and Kristen Bell. Oh,
damn that Kristen Bell!
That's right.
Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things is anti-Kristen Bell now. She's out.
Yeah, the Good Place totally made up for that, I guess. So you're forgetting Kristen. So let's see. So where to start with that? Okay, so I actually talked to somebody who did a very exhaustive take on the development of Planescape Torment. It's like a 5-hour video that just came out.
Wow.
I say it's absolutely worth watching. There's stuff in there that makes me just like, oh my God, I remember that, or I did not know that at the time. And so, it's very much worth diving into. But basically how that came about was I was actually hired to do a PlayStation Planescape game similar to Kingsfield, which was an early From Software Dark Souls thing, or Elden Ring, I guess, is their big thing these days. But I was going to be writing a game that was essentially, sort of like that, a first-person Planescape game with a little more action. Zeb Cook had also been hired on at Interplay, and he was doing one that was more of a dungeon crawl style thing in the vein of the game Stonekeep. And then Chris Avallone was working on yet another title. And at some point, the powers that be decided or realized, wait a second, we're working on 3 Planescape games with this license, and we have no idea if any of them are going to sell. So it's time to make just one Planescape game. And they canceled my game, and they turned Zeb's into Stonekeep. And it's really just as well, because I had no idea what I was doing as a lead designer on this. And so Chris Avallone was the lead designer for Planescape Torment, and he had written up a really great vision doc, a really great story by them. And it was originally called Last Rites. So I was the second designer, and we got to work on it, and I was sort of yes, this could totally happen in Planescape. This is not a thing that could happen. Yes, I agree. We should absolutely not have swords in this game or elves of any sort, because that's the sort of thing people expect out of fantasy. We're going to overturn all these tropes because we're edgy and young. And that was actually one of the guiding things. Just full of young piss and vinegar. Feeling like we're going to throw everything over, and just really focused on developing this cool story in this setting that I love so much. And it came out and did not sell as much as we thought it would initially. Its legend has grown in the telling, but it was not initially a super profitable game. But then people were like, oh my God, this is so great. Everybody, you got to play this game. And it's become sort of one of the touchstones for computer RPGs. Lately, I think now Baldur's Gate 3 came out, and that's amazing. It's a huge technical, and design feat, and that team has done just tremendous work. But until Disco Elysium came out, I don't think there was really a computer RPG that got into the depth of story that Torment did.
And Torment preceded the Neverwinter Nights and the original Baldur's Gate.
The original Baldur's Gate came out first.
Okay.
But we were in contact with BioWare at the time using the same engine.
Okay. Is that the Infinity engine or the
Infinity engine,
okay?
Yeah. And then they were working on Baldur's Gate 2 while we were wrapping up Planescape. So, all of these stuff, we're like, oh, you guys are doing this in Baldur's Gate. Well, check out what we're doing here. And they're like, oh yeah, hold my beer for Baldur's Gate 2. It was, I think, a cool sort of, friendly rivalry going on there. And, we're all friends with the BioWare people, the original BioWare people. So, but yeah, so that was cool. I wound up leaving TSR, I guess, in April of 2000. And we moved to Michigan in September of 2000. Which was quite an adjustment. I thought I was going to get a job in the computer game industry out here. Turns out there was not much of a computer game industry in Michigan at the time. So, there's Stardock, I guess, on the west side, but there were not a lot of companies doing stuff at the time. So I was doing a lot of freelance tabletop stuff, working with Paizo, developing their world. And that's another part of things up there, which was cool. I taught game design at a college for a little while, and then Brian Fargo got a hold of me and asked if I'd like to work on Wasteland 2. Brian was the founder of Interplay at the time, or way back when. And when Interplay got bought out and then he sort of got forced out, he started a new company called In Exile, that being Interplay Exile. And he was working on Wasteland 2, a sequel to the original Wasteland, which was sort of the inspiration for Fallout. And so I was super excited about that. And while we were working on that, he said, hey, by the way, I've got the Torment trademark. Do you want to work on that? And it was like, oh, hell yeah. We tried to get the Planescape license, but Wizards was not interested in moving forward with it at that time. So we said, okay, cool. What other world can we do? And I said, my friend Monty Cook had just developed a game called Numenera, which is about Earth in the, a billion years in the future, where, the essential basis of this world is Arthur C. Clarke's myth, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So we thought that would be a really cool one, or setting in which to explore the same sort of questions that we got to explore with Planescape Torment. So we kickstarted that and had absolutely no idea that it would be so damn popular. We were originally looking for, I think, $1 million and raised $5 million with like 90,000 backers, and a lot more people pledging after that as well. So that was super humbling to realize how many people loved this first thing that I worked on and were willing to bet on a follow-up to it.
Yeah, I think I saw you hit your goal in the first like 7 or 8 hours of the Kickstarter. Yeah. So what was that like behind the scenes? So you kind of just tracking the progress. You said you didn't anticipate this much support, but what were your thoughts like 7, 8 hours into the campaign when you're already hitting your goal? Yeah,
I mean, when we launched it and just saw those numbers skyrocket, we were like talking to each other like, oh my God, what's happening here? We got, we laid sort of the groundwork for a campaign and the stretch goals, but we were having to come up with stretch goals like on the fly. It was smashing through like our initial stuff that we thought was going to take a week to get to, like in the first 2 hours, like, oh my, we gotta start making things up. And that's where the apology for Complete Book of Elves video came in.
Was that your idea?
No, that was the producer, Kevin Saunders, his idea. So,
well, you're a good sport for doing it.
Yeah, I was like, damn you, Kevin. I don't want to apologize for this. I'm sort of proud of it. Also sort of ashamed, but also proud. And I've mostly come down on proud because, I was 22 when I wrote it. It's, I'm allowed to make mistakes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't even know if it's a mistake. I personally, when I read through it, I'm using it for DMing now. I mean, even if it's an older edition, it's still material you can incorporate into your repertoire.
Yeah, and I kind of feel like, the mechanical stuff has sort of disappeared because it's new editions, but the lore and narrative stuff is still available, and some of it's made it into fifth edition, which is nuts to me. Thinking, okay, so the fact that elves don't actually sleep, hey, I just totally made that up, and now it's canon. Cool.
Wait,
Okay, Blade Singers, canon. Okay, cool.
you made up that the elves don't sleep?
The
But they meditate.
Yeah. Yeah,
Wow.
I don't think it was in any products before that.
That's
That's pretty
that's
awesome.
that's pretty. I mean, and you mentioned Blade Singers now a couple of times. Like I that was one of the first things that I learned about elves when I started playing D&D was that you could become a Blade Singer. And I remember specifically, vividly, my DM RPing the guy who took on the Blade Singer. It was a prestige class in third edition, and he had a dream, and he failed his wisdom save, and he had a negative modifier for the rest of the day because he was like shaken because he saw like an elf maid die in his dream or something like that. But he became a Blade Singer.
Mm-hmm.
That's so cool.
Yeah, I was I totally taken aback by that, and so I was actually, over time I have become very proud of that work. So there was absolutely a deserved criticism of maybe you should have play tested some of this stuff, and then also the less deserved criticism of it's OP. It's like, well, play the game, man. Role play the game.
Yeah,
Make a character. Be the character.
Wasn't that the famous Gary Gygax thing? Somebody said, "Well, can you be a dragon in Dungeons and Dragons?" Like, yeah, but you're going to start as a level 1 dragon, right? Like, so do it. Yeah, be the OP, but it's on your DM to make an adventure that's going to be challenging to the choices that you make as a character.
Yeah. How would you level up a dragon?
I had the third edition supplemental. What was it called? The Dragon book. I can't remember. Dragonomicon.
Dragonomicon, yeah.
Dragonomicon, and that the art of that book was phenomenal. That was something that I've been talked about it a ton, but just like, sometimes just a cover is enough to get you to buy a book. And you flip there, it's like, this is whatever. And sometimes it's the other way around. But you're going back to the thing about playtesting. Isn't some of that the responsibility of the company that you're working for that say, hey, write this book, and then shouldn't they be playtesting it and being kind of that counterbalance to the creative action that you're going through?
Yeah, I would think so. A lot of my career has been, basically me just sort of flying along, seat of my pants, figuring it out on my own. I didn't have a lot of training for most of what I've done. The training for the turning over a design at TSR was, okay, well, here's the turnover packet. Make sure here's you get this many illustrations, this many full page, this many half page, this many quarter page. But you get 2 maps, you get a pull-out map. So draw all this stuff. Here's what your cartography turnover should look like. Good luck. And it wasn't anything about, okay, well, think about what the player experience is going to be. Think about how this actually gets used in a game. It was go write this. Yeah. So basically just like, okay, well, cool. I guess I'm going to base it off of these other things that have been done. Write up an outline and then just sort of guess at what the rest I'm doing.
How did you navigate the transition from tabletop to video game? And I guess when with the Tides of Numenera, was that you were the lead writer for that video game? So that was when you had the
creative
most
lead and lead writer. So yeah, that was weird. I had Interplay in 1996 from 2000 was very much sort of a boys' club. There were very few women working in the industry, and especially at Interplay, it was really a very drinking heavy culture. Go hang out with the boys kind of thing. It was a lot of fun, and at the same time, again, not a lot of training on how to do these things. My training for how to write dialogues was Fergus bringing me in and saying, okay, so here's conditionals, you write a question, and then here's the post conditionals or the variables that it sets, and then go to this node. Got it? Yes, okay. And that was that. So it was, again, figuring out a lot of stuff, seeing what other people were doing, and then trying to sort of fit into that mold and saying, okay, well, here's the things that the programmers could make that would make my job easier, like dialogue tools or database entry stuff. so that we could actually put stuff in and not require data entry specialists to put in all of our fantastic designs. That was, sort of a sarcastic fantastic, I guess literally fantastic. So it was a cool transition to go from semi-rural Wisconsin to Los Angeles. That was actually, sort of a weirder thing, but it all seemed sort of a piece, moving into the future. So, yeah, I don't know if that answered your question or not, but it was a strange time.
Yeah. Well, I think that at the end of it, it's observing how just kind of some of the business aspects of D&D right now, and thinking about how a lot of video games are made or other fantasy products are made, it doesn't seem like there's nearly the amount of kind of freedom given to the creatives that you seem to have, that you're describing. And, on the one hand, maybe sometimes that means that products are being released and you don't know how they sell and they're not making any money, and the business eventually goes out, which that's not necessarily a good thing for that business. But on the other hand, you can't have a creative product made by committee. And I think if you look at some of the less successful properties that have been released recently, it doesn't seem like there's any sort of coherent vision that that resonates with anybody, that has anything to say that is original. Thinking about kind of your description of Planescape, where there was something, you were saying something there, and if there had been a boardroom full of people to sign off on your weekly project updates, I don't know if you would have had that.
Yeah, and actually, I think that's actually a good point. There's, most of the more successful things that I've worked on have been things that flew under the radar of management until the product was well underway. Like Planescape itself, for instance, they're like, okay, cool, yeah, you can have some resources, but what we really want to focus on is Birthright. That was the idea of some of the people in Mahogany Row at TSR, which was, basically they said, it'd be cool is if the player could run a kingdom. Okay, we're going to have Rich Baker and Colin write up, make up this campaign for this. And they were super into the idea, and they wanted to know what we were up to, and we had to provide updates for them. Whereas with Planescape and then later Planescape Torment, there were other projects going on at the time that management was more interested in. And so could get away with more freedom and coming out with things. And that allowed us to really experiment with the ideas. And I think that it was better for it because we could actually do things that management was not thinking about.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't get a bunch of room to be creative in my day job, but sometimes I'm the most pleased with things that are cooking for a while, little side projects, and then they become relevant and they have a deeper impact than I anticipated they would. And that at that point, the managers are happy. But if you had taken the original kernel of the idea, it probably would never have germinated into anything.
Yeah. And I think this is absolutely a case where management needs to say, okay, you know what, our job is to make sure our creatives or our production people are, they have the resources they need, and we are going to trust their professionalism and their ideas because this is what we have hired them for. And we can give them constraints, and constraints are great. Constraints are fantastic for coming up with things creatively. Once you get limited by something, then you start trying to find ways to work within that. If you're given complete freedom, it's actually kind of paralyzing because suddenly anything is possible. And when anything is possible, nothing is possible. So the idea that you've been given constraints, like, okay, well, we actually want you to appeal to this crowd of people, or so we want to, say, compete with the Vampire, the Masquerade, because that's coming up. So go for, make sort of a dark setting that is also edgy and will appeal to these teens who are all nihilistic. And that was obviously why I got excited about Planescape. But given just sort of light constraints and a space to work in, makes it so much more rewarding than saying do whatever you want. And then also getting away from also somebody just looking over your shoulder like, don't do it like that.
I mean, that going back, that there's so many parallels between that and what we talked about earlier with being a dungeon master and not trying to railroad your players, but also you have to present something. You have to present story hooks. You have to enforce the verisimilitude of the setting. So you can't, in fact, roll a natural 20 and convince the king to give you his kingdom. Like, that's not how that works. Like, a natural 20 just means your head doesn't get chopped off when you are, being uppity with the royals or whatever it is. And so the Tides of Numenera, how long after the Kickstarter did it take to develop the game? And then talk about like going to market and getting the feedback from that.
So we had started kicking around the ideas for that in late 2012. The Kickstarter was in, I want to say April 2013, and we were in essentially pre-production for a couple of years. The focus for a lot of the production team at In Exile at that time was on the Wasteland 2 director's cut. So we were sort of like just making up crap and like, okay, cool, I guess this is what we're doing. And we had a lot of time to come up with these designs and dig up art things and, essentially say, here's how we want the game to go. And then in, I want to say early 2016, maybe late 2015, the producer got let go and they said, this game needs to come out. All the production people are coming on board now, and you got to make some cuts. And we're like, okay, I don't know. So we had to cut our planned ending and sort of rushed through the last bit of the game production, writing the dialogue, all of that. My friend Gavin, who later went on to become the lead writer for Overwatch 2, he and I would chat with each other on Skype all day, making stupid jokes at each other, which was actually great for both of our sanity. But the big thing that we were talking about was the schedule. We'd just like send giant pictures of eyes to each other, and then all hail the schedule. It was, we were probably putting in 60 to 70 hours per week toward the end of that project. The game launched in late 2017, and we thought, we'd picked a great release date. And it turns out that there was a new Zelda game coming out right then, and then also Horizon Zero Dawn. And then Nier Automata came out, and you're like, So that combined with the fact that Gamergate had been going pretty strong, and there were, the election was just over, and there were all sorts of, people who were very amped up on being very angry about things, sort of launched a campaign to essentially attack anything woke. And because, I had been arguing with people on Twitter, I guess this was one of the things that they decided was a suitable target. So the game, came out to fantastic critical reviews and not a ton of sales. And then there were, technical issues, a lot of crashes. And one of the problems that we ran into was that we had promised a lot of stuff in the Kickstarter, and not all of those promises got fulfilled, and people were rightly angry about that. We had a whole stretch goal about the Oasis of Mirajolio, so giant dome city in the desert, basically a big teardrop of water that we were supposed to, have the player go swim around and explore and do all sorts of adventures in there, but we had to cut it for scope, and people were really pissed about that, and they should have been. I wrote a book. There was a series of novellas that came out, and one of them was supposed to be mine. That didn't come out. People were pissed about that. So, there were absolutely some very valid criticisms that were launched at the game, and people still love it. But it was not the massive success that people had hoped. And the publisher Techland had been saying, yeah, it's going to sell 1.5 million copies. They had me go out to Wrocław in Poland for like 10 days to shoot a video and do some promo stuff. And, I was basically like sort of, mini celebrity, which is weird. And then this video they came out with was, Poland is pretty homogenous. So it was a lot of white people talking about this game and sort of a very arty video thing. So that promo kind of went nowhere, and there was kind of a lot of wasted resources developed or thrown away, I guess.
Did you feel like you could communicate some of, to the backers, to the the folks that you felt did not get what they wanted? Could you communicate to them sufficiently the rationale why, and try to make amends the best that you could?
Some, yeah, absolutely tried to do that, but in the end, the In Exile decided that it was going to sort of do the, okay, you know what, you guys are right, and the person who's going to apologize for this is Colin, even though I didn't make the decisions and the business decisions that led to this stuff. I've been saying, in fact, we need to tell the players that this stuff is not going to happen. Please communicate to them. No. Okay, but they're going to find out. Yeah, well, we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And when we did, it turned out that I was the one in charge of being like, hey.
There's the difference between crossing that bridge and being pushed over the edge. Is that something that, I guess, how common is that in the crowd-sourced creative venture? I mean, it cannot be that uncommon, but have you seen kind of similar things happen before? Have people kind of learned a lesson from that experience?
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the big ones was, plan your stretch goals well ahead of time and make sure that we had planned our stretch goals, but I guess you want to have contingency stretch goals as well, just because, we were making them up on the fly. Like, a lot of our guest writers, for instance, like, oh no, we gotta, figure out who's coming on board for this one. Okay, let's see, who do we know? That was actually one of the really cool things about working on Torment, is that I met Pat Rothfuss at Gen Con.
Oh yeah, okay.
And I went over to just tell him, how much I'd enjoyed his book. And I was like, hey, my name's Colin McComb. I work on Planescape Torment. He's like, you worked on Planescape Torment? Oh my God, I love that game. And, he fanboyed on me for like 10 minutes. And I was like, dude, I came over here to tell you how much I like you.
That's cool.
Yeah, it was super cool. So he agreed to work on Torment and actually wrote one of the best companions, I think, a character named Rin, who is essentially a little girl who talks to a pet rock that's a small god that allows her to do some stuff. But if you help her and then manage to send her home, she returns at the end of the spoilers for a game that's 7 years old, I guess, at this point. But you can send her home, and then she returns at the end of the game, like really powerful, with her gods grown up and able to really kick some ass.
Oh, that's really cool.
Yeah. Pat's got a great imagination. He's a really cool guy.
I just reading that third book.
Yeah.
I think there's increasing buzz that it's going to be coming out soon. I don't know how much of that is every 6 months somebody says, hey, George R. R. Martin is going to come out with, the Winds of Winter. I don't know if it's that syndrome or not, but
I wish I had some insight into it, but I also don't want to be like, Pat, give me the book, because it's like I understand, you've written 2 books that have been amazingly well received, and now you've got the pressure to wrap it up and make it perfect. And if it's not perfect, the internet's gonna fucking crucify you.
They'll write songs about you.
Yeah. Well, they'll write songs about how bad you suck, not about how great you are.
Yeah. Speaking of writing novels, we could also touch on that, unless there's anything else that you wanted to say.
Came out with. So there was a new book actually set in that world that just recently came out as well.
Oh, okay.
So it's hopefully book 3 is coming out, but again, if he gets to it, that's awesome. I subscribe to the Neil Gaiman. We got what we paid for it, which is we bought 2 books and we got 2 books, and if we get the 3rd book, that's great. And if not, Pat Rothfuss is not our bitch.
Yeah. Yeah. He's got other stuff going on. He's got a family. I think he's running a charity, right? That's really great work.
Yeah. Sorry, World Builders.
That's right.
A lot to Heifer International, I guess. So, anyway, sorry, back to your question that I totally interrupted.
Well, is there anything else that you wanted to talk about with Torment?
No, I'm still very happy with it. It feels like, I got to say the things that I wanted to say. I got to throw in a lot of the ideas about storytelling that I had wanted to experiment with for a long time. I mentioned heavy metal as one of my inspirations from earlier, and I got to do a lot of that, pastiche sort of storytelling with the idea of mirrors, where essentially you jump into the minds of other cast-offs and you can change some of their history. So I got to do a little bit of time bending, which was also really cool. I really enjoyed, talking about legacy, what it means to exist in the world and what you leave behind and what you owe to the people who came before you. and what you owe to yourself as well. And I got to dive into a lot of philosophy, and I'm really pleased with the work we did, and really happy with the people that I met along the way. And it was a great experience. So yeah, I hope that people will give it a chance on its own. It's a very much a novel, I guess, with writing inspired by Gene Wall, Shadow of the Torturer. His Book of the New Sun is a fantastic read. If you guys haven't read that, 100% recommend that.
All right, well, added that to the list. I know I'm playing through the game right now. I think Sean, you are as well. And the coming from just my most recent CRPG experiences with Baldur's Gate 3, which we could touch on it briefly earlier. We can come back to that if you want to, but just adapting to the new system was fun, just to see a different way to do RPG, just from a mechanical setting. And then the storytelling is so different than, I mean, it is kind of a cliche to have the kind of, character that is dropped into the world with amnesia, right? But this is such a different take on it. It's not waking up on the, the execution block in the most recent Elder Scrolls game, right? It was the concept of the cast off and the importance of mind and memory and things like that is so interesting. I like how you just describing it as a novel, because there's a lot more going on. It's much more literary than a I'll say, like, Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance is, kind of the most hack and slash quote unquote RPG out there. Like there's, these things are on two different fields completely.
Yeah. And, so, I mean, I was happy that we got a chance to make that game. Just because it felt like I don't know, sort of a love letter to all the stuff that I grew up with. And there's a bit in there. David Bowie died like toward about a year before we came out with it. So if you go to the Fifth Eye, the tavern full of psychic vets, again a nod to Blue Oyster Cult and a veteran of the Psychic Wars. There's also a whole lot of Bowie reference in there as well. If you're into some Bowie deep cuts, it's sort of my homage to him.
Yeah, and if you get the physical copy of the game, it comes with a CD of the soundtrack. So that's going to be used in my future D&D campaigns with some ambient background music. So that, and then it came with a map as well of the country. So that's
Mark Morgan did just a fantastic job with that soundtrack, just like he did with the Planescape soundtrack. We had a sort of dark. He doesn't like the term dark ambient, but it's a suitable description, I guess. In this case, musician Lustmord was supposed to be the original soundtrack guy, and he did some really great stuff, but wound up not using him for a Planescape tournament. So if you need stuff for background for your game, look up Lustmord.
One of the last sections we have, if we could just do some thoughts and reactions for you for the current state of RPGs. We don't want to take up your entire Sunday. So thank you for the time you've given us so far. But just current state of RPGs, things like 5th edition, what are your thoughts on that transition from what D&D was into what it is now with 5e? And I think the general consensus is that 5e made the game more playable for just average people. So what are your general thoughts with the state of D&D currently?
So, I thought the 3rd edition was a cool change. It was way more rules intensive than I liked. And that was, I think, part of the reason that I sort of dropped away from it, because it felt like, too much focus on miniatures and synergies with, actually making, tabletop maps and selling figurines. And then 4th edition was like, okay, well, computer games are popular. We got to make something that will appeal to the computer game crowd. Sort of a standardized action. And, I thought that was, again, really cool design, but probably not right for D&D, just because, who the D&D audience is. 5th edition feels like it is sort of harkened back to the best parts of 3 and 4 with a real focus on storytelling aspects of 2. And, I really appreciated it for that. My children have both gotten super into D&D because of that. So all of my saved office copies and back catalog of stuff that I've been carting around over the years has suddenly become relevant in the household again. And I love that. I especially like the fact that the game has become so popular and so many celebrities essentially have come out and said, yeah, oh no, absolutely, I played this game. Oh, I love it. Stephen Colbert, Joe Manganiello, and of course, Matt Mercer became a household name because of D&D. And I think it's fantastic that it's so accessible and that people are discovering it and discovering different things about it. So everybody can come into it with their own point of view and leave with their own experience. And everybody's experience is valid. I think that's super neat. I'm a little more concerned about the business angle of this game moving forward, with Hasbro trying to monetize everything, talking about AID, having people pay a monthly fee for access to adventures and characters, and at some point in here, I'm sure somebody said blockchain and probably Web 3.0, and it just all these things make my scam radar stand up, and I'm not real happy about the idea of monetizing every single aspect of society.
Yeah,
just the whole idea that you ask players to spend what do the core rulebooks go for at the store? $35 something like that.
50. The bigger books, like the Player's Handbook, DM Guide, those are both $50.
Yeah.
The smaller books, like Sword Coast Adventures Guide, those tend to be like $25, $30. And that's part of the problem too, is that you can get all of these on Amazon for like 50% off almost all the time. And I try not to support Amazon, but when the discount on the D&D books is so
I agree with you on that. But on the other hand, I'm looking at this 3.5 rule book came out in 2003 maybe, and the price on it is $30. It's 20 years ago, and given how inflation has changed, the price of rule books has gone up very, very slowly based on what materials and printing and employment costs all are these days.
I remember scrounging to buy the core rule books as a kid, and I'd never had the Monster Manual because I couldn't afford it. I could get the DMG and the Player's Handbook, but my point was on you pay whatever the price is for the rule book, but then if you want to use the virtual tabletop or just D&D Beyond, you have to go and buy those books all over again to get
digital copies.
Roughly the same price for not a physical good. So it's
that you don't own.
Yeah, that you don't. Yeah, you could lose access to it at any time, and as soon as you stop paying your annual subscription, you do. Those are concerning trends, but it's not unique to Hasbro, right? The same thing you're seeing with the streaming services, and we went to watch a movie on Amazon Prime last night, and now there are ads on Amazon Prime. I thought I was paying
the additional,
Yeah.
And we had talked. One of my main reasons for not making the switch to D&D Beyond was I had already owned 20 5th edition books. So now they're expecting me to go repurchase 20 books that I already own just to use their digital format.
We're coming out with a new edition. Now you got to buy it all new.
Then there's that. Yeah.
And it's and now it's going to be all digital. So if you want to play this, it's going to be all digital. And now you're going to have all of this essentially rental D&D and probably throw some advertising in and maybe beam it into your brain while you're sleeping.
Yeah. Why you don't even need to play? Just you can wake up remembering that you played.
That's right. With our exciting new wearable cybernetics, it's going to be, we can just stick D&D directly into your brain and it'll absolutely be 100% secure.
Why am I remembering D&D in Russian all of a sudden? Yeah.
Right? Yeah. This is the dumbest part of D&D. Damn it.
Yeah.
I was talking to a friend of mine, she's back in the 90s, and he was like, the cybernetic future, I would absolutely get, cybernetic implants, but I doubt I would do anything with my brain because who's developing this? I mean, you're like, okay, cool. I want to learn how to fly a helicopter like in the Matrix. Okay, cool. But suddenly you get a blue screen of death in your brain.
Yeah. You can't, we're not going to get a zero failure rate anything. So,
And, there's going to be ad-supported cybernetics and maybe, just the proliferation of advertising at every corner of our lives is grim.
Well, we are proud to be an ad-free podcast, although we would also be more than happy to take ads if anybody is willing to pay us. Okay, so there, yeah. So we've talked about D&D. What do you think about some of the other systems out there? You worked for Paizo and on Pathfinder as well. What do you think about some of the non-D&D RPG products out there?
So I mentioned Monty Cook. He always does really good, thoughtful products. He's got one of the best imaginations around, I think. I always feel like I'm sort of catching up to him. He recommended a band called Porcupine Tree to me back in 2006, I think. I think that he had been into them actually a long time before that. And it wasn't until a few years later that I suddenly realized, wait a second, this is actually my new favorite band. Damn it. Oh, you like Genesis, Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. Well, now I do. Now I like it a lot. Damn it. Monty, they're so good. Fred Hicks and Evil Hat Team, they do really good stuff. Ronin, it's I always get the pronunciation wrong. Nicole and Chris and their whole team do really great work. Owen and Stan at Super Genius are also just really smart, thoughtful designers. And there's so many people doing really cool things in tabletop right now. It's really hard to say, bad things about. I am concerned about what happens if Hasbro claws back the OGL or just sort of stops supporting any of that. And there's always the grognards who are trying to say, you only can play this way, and the only proper game is this kind of game. And P.S., we're going to make fun of trans people. Okay, I guess if you guys want to do that with your game, that's fine. But just, let's not get culture war shit in our hobby.
Yeah.
Play the game you want to play. Just don't use the bits that you don't like if you don't like it.
I would tie some of that back to the push to go digital, fully digital with D&D. Like if you do that, if you kind of remove the necessity to gather people around the table, you're gonna take away some of the opportunity, I think, for some of those other smaller games to reach a crowd. Because if you're getting together, like I mentioned, I got mad when my D&D group started playing Magic the Gathering, but hey, they were still getting together and doing stuff, and it would be a place for people to come and bring additional games. But if everybody's gathering around a digital tabletop, well, you're only going to be playing the things that company is going to be putting in that digital tabletop. So I doubt Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast would be willing to, hey, third party, small indie groups, we'll bring you into what we can do. I mean, you can do that with Roll20 and whoever else, but to a certain extent, but not if D&D is owning the tabletop.
Right. Well, this actually goes into some of the stuff that I'm working on now, which is virtual reality, mixed reality things. If you have a mixed reality headset, you can play games with people in a virtual space. And it's almost like you're there. You set up your boundaries of the area, and then you're sort of sharing this space with avatars of other people. And if you can develop games, rather if some of these tabletop companies are willing to invest in developing essentially tabletop rules for the virtual space, you can actually have this whole game going on, and you can make figurines, and you can make the die rolls, whatever, in this space that exists, and can animate and do all of these things, and you're sharing this experience with your friends.
And this is to your...
Yeah, my company, 3 Pound Games. So we're not developing tabletop stuff right now, but this is absolutely a market that is available and possible for people to do. There's already several games where you can, multiplayer VR games. I'm trying to remember the name of it, and it just slipped out of my brain. But you're essentially moving characters through a tile set dungeon, with elevation and monsters, and you're fighting, and it's fun. It's like, essentially playing, D&D zoomed in.
That would be fun. Yeah. Getting a VR headset and all the other stuff. I guess that's the hurdle, right? But we have to imagine the technology for that is going to start becoming a little bit more accessible to the average consumer.
Yeah, Quest 3 is a pretty reasonable price point at this point, and it compares favorably to the $2,000 Vision Pro. It's actually one of the videos has Zuckerberg essentially comparing them, and it's the most human I've seen him. And he's really excited and animated about it, as opposed to teleprompter reading guy
The wax figurine with a voice.
Yeah, exactly. He makes some really valid points. And, he's really in on this VR future, and I think it's neat. I don't think we would be where we are now without his championing of it.
Mm-hmm.
And the smaller the wearables get, the more likely it is that they're going to be integrated or integratable into things that we're already doing.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, that's how Sean and I, who are on opposite sides of the country, could resume our long and hiatus D&D campaign, right?
Yeah.
It's really cool, isn't it? I mean, you get to talk to people around the world. This is for all the stuff that is wrong with the world today. The instant connectability, I think, is something that we should be celebrating, as long as we're using it for friendship and fun, as opposed to sending dick pics to people in Antarctica.
Yeah. Well, Colin, thank you so much for coming on. If you're okay, just hanging around for like a minute or two once we stop recording, that would be great. But thank you so much for your time. It's been great. And the amount of information that we were able to extract from you has been great, at least for Sam and I's.
Yeah, we scratched the surface. It's the sheer number of different things that you've worked on, and could we ever see a book about your experiences in the world of tabletop gaming and computer gaming? I mean, this would be it'd be a great kind of story to tell too.
Yeah, possibly. I'd like to finish some of the other fiction I've been working on. Other fiction. My life does feel like fiction sometimes. I was dropping my son off at school the other day, and I mentioned the time that I met Foo Fighters. He was like, "What?" And I was like, "Oh, didn't I tell you about this?" Yeah. So back in the day, Weezer. This is actually because somebody covered the Weezer song "Buddy Holly," and so I mentioned that they also had a song on the same album called "In the Garage," where they're talking about their nerdy habits and rolling D20s. So I sent them some stuff, and they sent me some stuff, and their road manager invited me to come meet the band That Dog and the Foo Fighters when I came to Milwaukee. So I said, "You've got a really interesting life."
You could play some pretty cool 6 degrees of separation.
Yeah, so I guess I have. That is cool. I hadn't thought about writing it down.
I mean, it's partially because D&D specifically, maybe tabletop gaming in general, has been a relatively small for so long that now that things have, we've mentioned Matt Mercer and some of the celebrities coming out saying they're playing D&D. I would point to Stranger Things as also making it kind of very popular. And now there's a lot more interest in what we're doing. And it happens to coincide with both accessible tabletop game systems of, kind of ubiquity of computer gaming. There's probably, just a lot more interest in kind of the history of some of these things. I think, maybe that's me from where I sit, but the stories of different things that are now beloved coming together. I mean, I'm sure we could go for another couple hours and get into even more detail.
Yeah. Actually, Stranger Things reminds me of, that really is a very good representation of what D&D was like. Other than the outcasts, sitting in a basement doing their thing, and then also, Crazy Eddie doing his thing, jumping up and down and freaking out the normies. Yeah, that's what a lot of it was like. So yeah, no, this has been a lot of fun. Very, very nice distraction from my computer woes. So I appreciate you guys letting me air all of this out.
Well, it's great talking with you, and I'm glad that we could get connected. So thank you to the person who put us together. Won't drop her name onto the podcast, but I will see her tomorrow.
Awesome.
And let her know.
Yeah, tell her I say hi.
I will.
And to thank her from me as well, because damn, this is fun.
Well, we can do it again sometime. Maybe okay. We'll see. Come up with some additional questions, and maybe when we finally get a season 2 of Amazon Rings of Power, we can have a breakdown. We didn't even really dive into that in much detail, but there's a ton of the kind of pop culture fantasy stuff that we could talk about, and maybe that could be a future episode.
Okay, yeah, I would absolutely be down for that.
Sean, anything else to say before we close this out?
That's it for me. Just thanks again.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun, gents. Thank you very much.
And that was the second part of our interview with Colin McComb. We'd like to thank Colin for coming on again and just sharing all of the information he had about his time with TSR and everything he's engaged with in terms of fantasy material. Next week, Sam and I will be recording, and that was part 2 of our interview with Colin. We would like to thank him for coming on and taking the time to talk about his experience with all things nerdy. And next week, Sam and I will be covering a new topic, Dune, the 1980s film, which was packed into one movie, unlike the current Dune, which was split into 2 parts. But we will be talking about reviewing, unraveling everything that happened with the 1980s Dune. So if that interests you, please stay tuned for our episode next week. You can follow us on Facebook, Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things. You can email us at elvesringsandnerdythings@gmail.com. And we have a Facebook group where we engage with some of our listeners, Elves, Rings, and Nerdy Things podcast. Let us know if there's anything you'd like to listen to, if there's anything in particular that you'd like us to cover. Thank you very much, and we will see you next week.